Welcome to Consider This, where thoughts and conversations come together. My name is Barry Wright. I'm the director of the Niagara Community Observatory, and here we're going to talk today about physical activity and why it's important for our children primarily, but for all of us here in Niagara. What we're looking at today is how can we support our children and youth to be more active and in a healthier lifestyle. The challenge, I guess, is that children are now less active than we used to be, certainly in my day, and perhaps in other generations as well. So we found in Niagara Region has actually done a little infograph that I'm sure you're both aware of, that children, only 20% of the children now are doing the 60 minutes of physical activity a day, and that definitely is a challenge. I don't think anybody walks to school anymore. I think they're only saying 1 in 5 children actually walk to school, and with the busing and things that are taking place on right now. Joining us today, our questions are Bareket Falk, as a professor in the Kinesiology Department here at Brock University, and Erin McBride is at the YMCA and looks after youth outreach and the day camp program with the YMCA. So thank you for joining us today, and I'll maybe ask you first if you may talk a little bit about your connection with us and youth and physical fitness and activity.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Great opportunity, so I'm very happy to be here. I'll give you a little bit of background. First of all, I'm a mother. I'm a mother of 3 very active boys, so that's one place I'm coming from. I'm also a researcher and an educator, and as you said, I'm here at Brock University at the Kinesiology Department. I am what you call a pediatric exercise physiologist, which is a little bit of a mouthful, but I usually say that if anatomy is the way that the body is built, physiology is the way that it works. Exercise physiology is the way that the body works or functions during exercise, and pediatric exercise physiology is how children's bodies work during exercise. So that's where I come from. My particular area is more about the effects of exercise, for example, on bone strength or bone health, as well as how does growth and maturation affect the way our muscles work. So that's where I come from.
Great. Good start. Erin, a little bit of background with the Y?
Yes. So I oversee youth outreach, which is our community program. So we have youth action programs, which are recreational-based programs for 9 to 14-year-olds, is kind of the focus of those programs. So we're at 18 schools across Niagara in the evening, and those are free drop-in programs. So we focus on using the school gym and having youth come out and participate in active games that are facilitated by YMCA staff. I also oversee 40-year leagues, as well as Pro Kids and our day camp program. So those ages for camp are 5 to 16 in the summer, so it's a bit more broad during the winter holidays, March break and summer.
Great. Can you talk a little bit then about what is it that physical activity means, and how has it changed over time then?
Well, it has, even the definition or the conception of physical activity, I think, has changed over time. I think you started out saying that children today are less active than they were when we were children, and I think this is true. I'm not the only one who thinks this is true. There's a lot of data to support that. I think that our physical activity recommendations today are 60 minutes, for 5-year-olds and up, are 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity. So what does that mean? This is really a very difficult thing to define. But when somebody hears, or when you hear moderate to vigorous physical activity, usually you think of continuous play or continuous movement, continuous action. And from a physiological perspective, you think aerobic type of exercise, which is good. It's good. It's very, there's a lot of data. There are a lot of data that show that aerobic type of exercise is very important, for example, for health. But there's also the strength development, muscle strength development, which affects not just your muscles, actually affects your bones too, which we tend to forget. We get to ignore. We sort of overlook that. And I think this is something it's not officially missing because it's officially in the recommendations, but we don't really pay attention to that. So,
what are the benefits then? Obviously, we can move well and those sorts of things. But what is in the short term for our children? But what is the long term effect? A little bit of this as well.
Well, there are a lot of benefits to physical activity. You can look at the health benefits, for example. So the health benefits are anything from prevention or management of obesity, things like obesity, cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease. So when I say metabolic, that's, for example, diabetes. So diabetes is a metabolic type of disease. And I'll just give you an example. Diabetes, there's type 1 and type 2 diabetes. We used to call them juvenile diabetes, which is type 1, and adult set diabetes, which is type 2. We don't use those terms anymore because this type 2 diabetes that used to really be expressed in adults, today we see this more and more in youth. So we call this type 2 diabetes, and very much related to sedentary time or to lack of physical activity. So we know that physical activity and exercise is very important for health in general, for cardiovascular health, for metabolic health. But we also know, and we know this very clearly, that physical activity and exercise, impact type of exercise, is very, very beneficial for bones, especially during the growing years. So what happens during life, or the lifespan, is that as we grow, we increase our bone mass and strength. We increase it until our young adulthood. Then we plateau, and then as we get older, our bones are, decrease in mass and decrease in strength. The only time that we can add bone, that we can enhance our bone mass or our bone strength, is during youth. That's why we call this a critical period, a critical or a sensitive period for increasing bone strength. And the best way to do it, the most efficient way to do it, is using exercise, using physical activity. And so really what happens is that with physical activity, you can, in a way, you can put more bone in the bank. So you can increase your peak bone mass when you're an adult, and therefore you, at least in theory, you postpone or delay or prevent osteoporosis and osteoporotic fraction. So in that respect, physical activity and exercise are absolutely crucial for bone health during youth.
Great. Well, I was wondering, Erin, if you could talk a little bit about the programs and things of the Y, or have you noticed over time as well that the Y's programs have changed?
Yeah, absolutely. We're focusing a lot more intentionally in our programs about having opportunities for children and youth to achieve the 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity, knowing that they're just in our programs for one portion of the day, but really training our staff on the importance of that and of activities that are non-elimination, so that it's not the same kids getting out each time, and that there's an opportunity to get back in the activities and stay participating, and non-weighting activities as well. So something like baseball is a great sport, but there's a lot of standing around in baseball. So we're looking at more activities that involve regular movement and constant movement, and intentionally programming for those in a lot of our programs.
Okay. So thank you for talking about the kinds of programs that, at the Y. I think you make a great point, though, Erin, that there's the Y is only have the children for a certain period of time, and thinking a little bit about the school systems as well out there. And I know we don't have anybody from the school boards here, but I was wondering, do you have some insight on what does happen in the school programs?
Well, I should qualify, I don't work directly with the schools, so everything I'm saying now is really from my own personal experience as well as through my children's experience. So maybe I can say a little bit. I think schools have a really good opportunity to provide children with exposure to physical activity. I think it would be wrong of us as a society to say, oh, well, schools are responsible for providing children or for ensuring that children get all of their physical activity needs. I think the schools, as I said, should provide the opportunity. And saying this, I'm going to say that we have physical education in schools. Physical education, we can debate about this. What is the role of physical education? Is it to teach them how to move, or is it to provide them, to make them move and active, as I said? But even if putting that controversy aside, or that debate aside, if you look at elementary schools, many of them do not have physical education specialists. And so that means that even if you have phys ed on the schedule, the kids may or may not go to the gym. They may or may not go outside. They may or may not have instruction in what they're doing, because many of the classroom teachers who end up teaching or instructing phys ed don't really feel comfortable in that role. And so it sort of falls in between the cracks, and the children at the end, it's on their schedule, but their
May or may not.
timetable, but they don't necessarily get it. And likewise goes for what they call DPA, or daily physical activity, which I think the intention was fantastic. For those who don't know, DPA means that every child is supposed to get 20 minutes of physical activity every day in school. Like I said, I think it's scheduled in, but I don't think they get
Might
this.
be able to have it. What kind of things might parents do to create that right environment for their children?
I think you're absolutely right. It's not one place. It's getting kids active with any agency they're involved in, or any sport league, or any community group. It's at school and then at home. So I think part of it is parents encouraging them to get off the couch, get away from the video games, go outside. And I know there's increased awareness or heightened perceived risk around kids playing outside. But also finding opportunities, if it's outside or inside, to be active as a family and role modeling that for them too. I think we underestimate how much our children look up to us as role models, and how much they will imitate the behaviors they see through their parents. So if parents are active or doing activities as a family, then obviously the kids are more likely to be active. And same with healthy eating too. If parents are role modeling that and making healthy food choices, then the children are more likely to do the same.
Any thoughts of you as a parent have been doing? And
yes, I'll share with you. So for example, I think it's the DSBN that has a run in the spring, and they encourage parents and students to participate in this run. And so maybe you want to practice for this run. And so I, for example, went out with my 10-year-old son, at the time 10 years old, and we started out practicing together, and pacing and explaining and just figuring out what the distance is. And I'll have to tell you, when we got there, and this has been for several years now, so every time we get to the race, we go there together because, I want to run with you, and I'll watch over you, etc. And within 10 meters, he's like, bye, Mom, he's gone. But he leaves me far behind. But I think that the fact that we did this together, at least at one point, and even now we will go out together, even though he leaves me much behind. I think that's a helpful way to do it. And I think that if you look at research, there's not a lot of parents do that for various reasons, usually very good reasons. And I think that the value is something, the numbers are something like 20 to 30% of parents are involved in children's physical activity. So I think there's a lot more that we can do. Even it's sort of a paradox because children are not very active today, but on the other hand, many more children today are enrolled or participate in structured physical activity. So I'm not sure exactly if it's the Y type of activities, the drop-in types of activities, but when they say structured physical activity, it's usually youth sports, right, at various levels. So a lot of kids are enrolled. It doesn't mean they're active, though, and I think we need to be very careful. It doesn't, dismiss the fact that we as parents need to also be involved, because just the fact that we enrolled them in ball hockey or in soccer or whatever doesn't mean they're actually active for that whole time.
Absolutely.
Do you have some parent strategies as well that you would recommend or they could consider?
I think something I'd add, I just read an article on the Active for Life website, and they have parent resources, which I think are great. And one of the articles talked about it would be a shift for parents, but the importance of not using your child as an excuse to not participate, because we know parents are busy and they're taking their child from one activity to another a lot of the times, but using them for motivation to participate. So instead of saying, I'm not working out, I'm not running, I'm not walking, whatever it is, because I'm too busy because of my child. So thinking about the impact that has too, if a child hears that as they're the reason, but rather using them as your motivation because you want to be healthy, you want to role model that. So I think it can be a lot of different things. I think running together is a great example. It doesn't have to be something that costs a lot of money. It's getting outside, it's getting to a community center, walking the track, skating. We have lots of arenas in Niagara, so there's lots of family skate times in the winter, and just swimming, taking advantage of whatever interests you. And I think throughout all of what we talk about, whether it's school, whether it's at home, whether it's with a community organization, it has to be fun for the kids. And if we can make it fun through any avenue, then they're gonna stick with it. They're gonna want to do it more. So I think that's the important element of figuring out what works for them.
So I wanted to talk about this collective 60 minutes. I'm just wondering if there's, is there an ideal amount of time? So, in our own personal family, we've got dogs that need walking. We have, bike rides that we go on, things along this line. But is our 5-minute, windows good, or do you think do you need a longer period to really get the good benefit?
Right. To answer your question, we say 60 minutes of physical activity. We used to say, this was years ago, that if it's less than 20 minutes continuous, then it doesn't really have any value. But this is not true, and we know today that this is not true. So really, it's 60 minutes of accumulated physical activity, and at least 60 minutes. Let's not, it's not the top is 60 minutes. We want to get more than 60 minutes of physical activity, and not just continuous type of physical activity, even things like, we know, for example, that exercise that affects bone or that benefits bone is actually not the continuous type of physical activity. Right. On the contrary, we want to do it in bursts of activity because the bone as a tissue, what happens is during exercise, it will be stressed, and so it will repair itself and grow more, but it needs that time to quote recover, right? And so actually this has been shown experimentally that it's much better to do it in breaks, at least in terms of bone. In terms of cardiovascular health, that might be a little bit different, but no, we shouldn't be, sort of in that box and say, well, if I can't do it in one sitting, then maybe I shouldn't do it.
Okay, so the collective, perfect. That's good. What do you think, Erin, when we look at why aren't the youth of today doing an hour of activity? What's changed?
I think one of the big things is the whole idea of physical literacy, and that because children and youth aren't as active, aren't playing outside, they're not naturally developing some of the skills that previous generations would develop. So things like running, jumping, throwing. With more awareness around physical literacy, there's more focus now in recreational programs, in leagues and sports programs around helping children develop those skills so they have the confidence and the competence to go out for school teams, try those sports, participate in physical activity on a regular basis. So there's more awareness, but I think there's still the opportunity for greater awareness, and especially when it comes to parents and families, and understanding that, even though they may be in a recreational program playing a game, there's still skill development in there. They still may be learning to hop, and to hop with proficiency, and that may be a skill they can use in other activities.
There's a lot of focus now emphasis being put today on what we call physical literacy. I agree with you on this. I think an important thing about it is that regardless of the specific skills, as you mentioned, it provides children sort of with a vocabulary, maybe we can look at it that way, that they can use today, tomorrow, and later on in life, and not be afraid to join other types of activities. So there's something called tracking, for example. Tracking means that if I say that physical activity levels track through life, that means that if you're an active child, chances are that you will be an active adult. So the tracking of physical activity, it's not that high. But still, we can say that being active in youth is going to increase the probability of you being active as an adult. It doesn't guarantee it, of course, but it will increase the probability. So, you know, health-wise, you're right, they should have fun. If they don't have fun, they're not going to do it, right? But it also provides them with the skills to do this later on, or to have the confidence to do it later on in life.
So recently, I've with the update of my phone, I now have my walking amount of things on there, and I found that it's interesting for me to do that. Do you think, how effective do you think that would be on, you know, and the watches and things that are happening? Is this something that, with the gamification of being active, you know, because I do, at the end I go, rats, I didn't get to 10,000 steps again today. But what are your thoughts on things like this?
Yeah, so I think it's great. How long have you had this on your phone?
About 3 months.
Oh, so that's a pretty good, because what happens very often is that at the beginning you say, oh, rats, I didn't get my 10,000, I got to go out and get some more. And then later on it says, oh, rats, I didn't get it today. And then you say, oh, well, I didn't get it today. And the point is that at the beginning it can be effective at increasing physical activity, so it's great. More in adults, I think, or older youth.
Yeah.
But it wears off very quickly. And the thing about these games, I don't know, I think we do need to somehow get these, take advantage of these games. But there's a lot of literature showing that for healthy children, these active video games are not a good substitute for physical activity. They are absolutely not. Yes, the kids might be moving and they might be playing tennis or basketball or even boxing. Exactly. But if you actually measure the amount of energy that they expend during these activities, it is a little bit above resting. Yes, it's above resting. But it doesn't even come close to real tennis or real basketball or real boxing. So it's a misconception. We should not, rely on these games. Having said that, where they can be very beneficial is for children with any type of, or some disabilities. I think in those cases, we're not there yet, but I think we can exploit these games to our benefits, or to obviously the children's benefits, to provide them with more opportunities for physical activity and motivation and fun, you know.
So one of the programs I just learned about, which kind of speaks to what you were asking about using these tools to help kids track, is the 60 Minutes Kids Club. So it's focused on schools, but a lot of it is kid-friendly tracking, and it's more than physical activity. It looks at water, it looks at sleep, and some other important factors. And they do it in terms of challenge blocks, so to try to keep their interest. It's not, you can use it all year, but we know after a while that it will kind of lose its appeal. But if your whole classroom is doing a challenge for these 2 or 3 weeks, then they're encouraging them to go on and track that, but also just to be aware. I think with physical literacy, there's also food literacy, and that kids don't realize, and some parents don't realize, what's in the food we're eating or what's in the food their kids are eating. So also just building that awareness of the importance of a balanced diet and drinking water and not just sugary drinks.
So it's all it's a holistic story.
Yes, and actually you bring up the sugary drinks. I am not a nutritionist, but as I said, I do have a little bit of background in exercise and bone. So we know that exercise benefits bone. One of the things we know about these sugary drinks is these are one of the things that actually detract from bone. It's not the right word, but we know that there's a negative correlation. In other words, children that consume a lot of sugary drinks, often carbonated drinks, they are the ones who are going to have the lower bone mass or bone strength. So it goes together. I agree with you 100%.
I just, I think, heard a story about bouncing at the bell, and I think it came from you, and I was wondering if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about that story, because I think it's a very interesting one.
Yes, it's a wonderful study, a Canadian study actually, that they called it Bounce at the Bell, because what they did was they went into schools and they implemented a program where at every bell, so at every recess, right, the kids did a number of jumps. And it went progressively, so the number of jumps increased and the height increased. But it didn't take more than, I don't know, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. So they did this over a year, and actually over 2 years. And they analyzed the data over a year, over 2 years. They demonstrated, even after 1 year, those kids that did this bounce at the bell program, which really did not take much, actually accumulated more bone. So their bone increased in strength, in mass and in strength, to a greater degree, a greater extent than those kids who did not do this very simple, very short program of bouncing or jumping at the bell. So it really doesn't take much. That's, I think that was the point of it. And very easy to implement, very, very easy.
Okay. Could be done at home, wake up time, join your children.
I don't know,
bounce.
wake up.
For your morning person.
So we've talked a little bit about some things the schools might do, and then obviously parents can do and work with organizations like yourself. What other things could our policymakers do? For example, if we're not walking to school, I guess we're riding buses or what is happening. But are there other types of things that we as a collective community could do to help enhance our physical activity?
You want to?
Sure.
Yeah. I knew you would.
I think there's a lot. I think different levels of government play an important role. The Ontario government set the goal of reducing childhood obesity by 20% in 5 years. So that's a very big goal. But there's some intention behind it, which is great. And we're starting to see now that the Healthy Kids Community Challenge is kind of starting in January. We're going to start to see more of the kind of ripple effect of that commitment. But I think that's one piece, and I think there's also pieces for local municipalities as well. It's programming, it's awareness, it's having sidewalks and having parks that have good lighting and that are safe places for kids and families. Yeah, absolutely. So there's not one thing,
Right.
Because we're so diverse and our families are so diverse, but looking at kind of overall strategies to encourage people to be more physically active.
I agree. I'm just going to pick up on a point that you, actually both of you mentioned, because it's sort of close to heart. So infrastructure is very important to allow or provide opportunities for physical activity. I think that we're not doing bad in terms of infrastructure. We have playgrounds. We have some bike lanes. We have some sidewalks. Sometimes the playgrounds are not as accessible as we would want them to be. Sometimes, I mean, my child would have to walk 20 minutes, cross a road to get to the nearest playground. But I think that there's some examples, specifically local examples, where I guess the municipality could do a little bit more. And I'll give you an example close to heart. We're at Brock University. The main road leading up to it is St. David's Road. There are many students that live that take that road to the university, and there's no way that they can either walk or cycle. There's no sidewalk, and there's no cycling path, and it's actually very, very dangerous. And it's not far, and I know this has been talked about more than just today, but this is something that I think that we can do at the local government or municipality level. Yeah.
Is there a percentage, do you think, that we should be doing structured versus unstructured? There were some comments earlier that we're very good at signing up for the local programs.
The more children spend outdoors, regardless of whether this is structured or not, the more active they're going to be. And usually when we say spend time outdoors, it's usually unstructured. Most of the play outdoors is unstructured. And just let them go. Just let them have fun. Let them play. They will figure it out. We don't have to tell them the rules. They will make them up on their own, and just let them have fun. I think you said that at the beginning.
And I think there's other benefits to that around developing creativity and imagination and other things that will come out of that as well. So, and I think it's all about what works for your family in terms of, the amount of time or the percentage of time. I think doing anything is better than doing nothing. So start somewhere, even if it's 1 or 2 days a week, and then build from there. And I think just having, depending on what interests your kids have, a balance so that, you know, they're not programmed 7 days a week necessarily, but they also have time, some time in programming, some time, you know, in more recreational or more outside play, and just encouraging them to be involved in whatever is fun for them and whatever interests them. And there comes an age where they may choose to specialize, but I think especially when our children are younger, it's important for them to have exposure to a lot of different things, and then they can decide, okay, this is an activity I want to do at a more competitive level or at a recreational level. But if they don't try it, they're never going to know what they're good at and what they enjoy doing.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Well, just as we're kind of wrapping up our show for today, just maybe I'll invite you if there's, again, to remind us of maybe a key point or two that you'd like to make sure our audience remembers as we close. So I'll start with you. Do you have a major insights that you'd really like them to follow through with?
Well, I'm going to think about this. I think the key point here was that children need to have fun. And if they have fun, they will be active. And if they're active, they will be healthier, they will maintain body composition, body weight, they will eat more healthy. This will affect their academic performance, which we didn't really talk about, but we know today that physical activity can affect not just grades, but really actually cognition. So it's have fun, will play, will affect your health and many, many more aspects of life.
And I would just add that I think we've talked about this, but everyone plays a role. It's not just up to one organization or one, you know, it's not just up to the schools. It's not just up to families. We all need to work together. And I agree with your comments, absolutely. And I think the more we can engage people at different stages of life and get them involved, and you know, mix those opportunities throughout the day, then the more physically active our whole society is going to be.
Super. Well, I think that's wonderful idea. My one takeaway is that as well as that 60 minutes and finding the 60 minutes, and it's a collective 60 and
At least 60.
Yeah, at least 60. Thank you very much to be able to do that. And one of the great ways with your children is if you're doing it with them.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a key point. So I want to thank you very much, Dr. Falk from the Kinesiology Department here at Brock University, and Erin McBride with the YMCA here in Niagara as well. And so this has been another Consider This, which is a joint production of Brock University and Niagara Connects. And that's Niagara Connects is a network of community collaborators that are working on building a stronger Niagara. So my name is Barry Wright, and I'm the director of the Niagara Community Observatory, and I want to thank you very much for joining us today.